Welcome to the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week I've got Brian Hill in the house. He is a physical therapist, CSCS, but we're not going to talk sports. We're talking mountain climbing to the extreme, guiding a blind Navy veteran to the summit of Mount Everest. Here we go. This week in Zealous, it's just going to be a little bit different. I do have somebody that is a physical therapist and CSCS, but the story is not around professional sports. It's going to be completely different. Brian Hill is with me today. And I got to say, the first time I met Brian, he walked into my training facility in Pleasure Point in Santa Cruz and introduced himself. He'd just come into town from Florida, and he had heard about these long distance paddles that we had been a part of, that I had been a part of, where you paddle on a prone board, either on your belly or on your knees, just using your arms, and go from Santa Cruz across Monterey Bay to Monterey, which is just shy of 30 miles. And so he wanted to learn more about it. And of course, now that I know this guy more, that's kind of like a warm up for him and what he does in his life. So we're going to talk all about it. Brian, welcome to Zealous. We're going to get underway, but just first, hey, thanks for being on.
Hey man, thanks so much for having me on. It's funny. I'm glad you remember that day because I definitely remember it as well. And I'm pretty much an introverted guy, so it took a lot for me just to kind of step out and just come into town and just walk into Rocky's functional training, or is it Rocky? Just Rocky.
We've changed it. Yeah, we've changed it so many times. We'll call it Rockies, but yeah.
I remember walking in that day. That was probably about 6 years ago or so, and I'd heard about what you guys were doing with the crossing, and I was like, all right, I just got to get out there and get in with the right group of people. So it's kind of funny to see where it's come across the last 6 years. What if I hadn't done that? Maybe.
Are you doing it this Saturday? Because it's coming up.
This will be my first time in five years, I think, that I haven't done it. So my toe, I had an amputation on my toe from the story we're about to talk about, and it's been 5 weeks since the surgery, and my wound is still not closing. So yeah. So hopefully it closes soon. But yeah, I just can't get in the water, so no run the risk of infection and everything.
Oh well, yeah, we won't talk about the swell that's hitting right now either, because it'll just be rubbing salt in the wounds. But I mean, I do remember that first day we met, and then we started talking about the paddling, and it happens where people are, whether they're surfers or they're stand-up paddlers or whatever, they hear about this event of paddling, basically more than a marathon. And of course, any ocean's shark infested, so I don't have to bring that up. But over the deep canyons and all that, it's pretty gnarly with the way the weather can turn. But so I was kind of feeling you out at that moment, going, okay, well, obviously this guy looks fit. I mean, have you done any paddling? And you just casually mentioned, oh yeah, I've done a paddle. Was it from the Bahamas to Florida?
Yeah. The crossing for a cure. Now it's called crossing for cystic fibrosis. Yeah, that's a big one too. You leave from Bimini and you paddle to I think it's Lake Worth, Florida. It's about 80 miles across the Gulf Stream, and that's a wild one too. It's different, It's obviously open waters. You start around 1 a.m. and just paddle straight through the night. I mean, it's a big event, but there's something about being out here on the Pacific and paddling over this 6,000 foot, bit of water beneath you, and knowing there's these large whales and elephant seals and all these other things. It's a little bit different story out here.
Yeah, and things with teeth we won't even mention. Right. Definitely got bumped on more than one occasion. I just keep your head down and keep paddling. But so what's great is that both events are fundraising, and so giving back to the community, helping those that are perhaps less fortunate or in situations such as families battling cystic fibrosis. Both paddle events, for those that are unaware, are fundraisers for different organizations helping support those with cystic fibrosis, because we find that being by the ocean, that salt water actually is very beneficial for people with CF. And this particular organization that's getting ready, by the time this podcast airs, they will hopefully have already done the crossing on September 23rd, Saturday, provided that the weather is right and conditions are good. But to date, it's been over $500,000 raised, and started back in about 5 or 6 years ago. So pretty remarkable. But you take it even one step further. Like the reason why I have you on, aside from you being just hard as nails and a go-getter and a total adventurer, is that you formed Sightless Summits. You and
Yes.
a buddy of yours formed this group to take a gentleman to the summit of Mount Everest this year. I want to know all about it. I mean, it's one
Yeah.
thing to climb Everest, but it's another to guide a sightless individual up there.
Yeah.
So how did this all begin?
Well, so I was in Nepal in 2021 doing photos for a friend of mine. He was going with his family. He was going to climb Everest that year, and his whole family was going to go along with him to base camp. And he had asked that I come along and do photography, just for the trip along the way, just so they can have memories. So this is my partner now, Michael. Michael climbed Everest that year and is really just kind of a badass, he retired at 38 and has climbed most of the major peaks in the world, and has a big rock climber, and he's biking from Portland, Oregon down to Punta Arenas in South America. So just kind of in segments, but just same thing. He just likes to kind of live outside the box and do some pretty wild things. But anyways, him and I were at base camp, and he had met Lonnie on Aconcagua, which is the tallest mountain in the South America. And we were sitting there at base camp, and he's like, I think we need to ask Lonnie. Maybe Lonnie would want to come and climb Everest. And I was like, yeah, we should definitely do that. Not thinking returning or anything.
Yeah.
So I can't remember if we called or we texted, but either way, we reached out to Lonnie from base camp, and within just a few minutes, we get a message back, and Lonnie's like, I'm in. We'd asked him, hey, do you want to climb Everest? He's like, yes. And it just so turns out Lonnie is a part of something called the Blinded Veterans Association. It's a nonprofit that does a lot of good work for blinded veterans. And basically they had come to him a couple of days prior to us asking him that. And they said, Lonnie, is there any way, like anything you can think of that you can do that can help to expand our outreach? And so we had reached out to him 2 days later, and he was like, he doesn't even really like climbing, but he was like, this is it. This is it. So it's funny because he's a big whitewater kayaker. Just imagine, completely blind, but loves whitewater.
Wow.
But yeah, this opportunity presented itself, and that's just kind of how the whole thing formed. And that's just the kind of guy Lonnie is too. He's just like anything he can do to help raise awareness for the blinded community, and he's in for.
Okay, just for the record, none of you were under the influence of any substances or liquids.
No.
Fantastic. Okay, so what was the date that the concept came up to the time that you actually summited?
So it must have been April of 2021. And so we had, we'd thrown out, obviously, let's just go straight for Everest. Why not? And but then we were like, we kind of took a step back. We're like, okay, we need to just try this out, see how it goes. So we put Denali on the calendar, in which Denali is arguably one of the toughest of the 7 summits. It's very challenging, not much support. You don't have Sherpas, you don't have porters, none of that. It's just you're carrying loads forward, dropping them, coming back. I mean, it's much I don't say more challenging, but so we decided to do that, and we did that in 2022. And I thankfully say we made it up to the top, and we did it in pretty good time. And we were wondering, how fast are we going to be able to move with Lonnie? Is it going to go a lot slower, or what's it going to look like? And it turns out we ended up doing it in 11 days, Denali, and it's typically. It really just depends on weather, Denali does, but it's typically like a 14 to like a 20-day trip, roughly. I mean, wow. A lot of people get stuck in their tents for days at a time just because the weather in Denali is so bad. But that mountain just kind of showed us, hey, we can really move. We can move okay with Lonnie. It's not going to be too bad. And yeah, so that kind of pushed us on to Everest, and ultimately we did Everest, but the whole goal of Sightless Summits is to do something called the Explorers Grand Slam. So it's the tallest mountain on every continent, and then it's skiing to the North Pole and skiing to the South Pole.
Oh, just those things. That's it. Oh my God.
Just those things. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's 6 peaks, or are you also
That
climbing the
it's
highest peak in Antarctica?
so that all right. So that is what we're fundraising for right now. It's kind of coming down to the line. We have to actually have the money by September 23rd, and we got to have another about $75,000. So it is not looking likely that we're going to be able to go this year to Antarctica. But there's a lot of other things we can do next year, and then we'll just go 1 year later. So.
All right, for the listening audience, of course, this is airing after the 23rd, but
Yeah.
if you've got some deep pockets or know somebody that does and wants to contribute, we'll put the links in the description below. Okay, so back to Everest, or Denali. First, obviously, it was summertime that you went up to Alaska and did Denali.
Yes, yeah, that was June of 2022. Yes.
Favorable conditions. Lonnie's
Yeah.
cranking up there,
Yeah.
and comparatively to your skill and your pace, was it pretty comparable in terms of Lonnie's ability, or you just have to kind of ease back,
Yeah.
touch
So
it down a little bit?
it depends, on the terrain, obviously. Like when you fly in to the Hilton Glacier in Denali, you land, and you're basically on just wide open snowy terrain. It's all crevasses everywhere. It's glaciated, so but it looks like a nice just kind of football field. You can just walk across, and you never know if it's an inch of ice you're walking on. But that kind of terrain, Lonnie can go. He'll won't even hold on to anything. He'll just ask for you to kind of walk heavy, so he can get a good idea of what the terrain is like. Is it hard packed snow? Is it icy? Is it soft snow? And that gives him a lot of information as far as how he should step forward. So basically, you'll get in a line, he'll get behind you, and he'll just follow along. So on that kind of terrain, he flies. When you get a little bit more technical, like on Denali, there's it's called the head wall above 14 camp, and then something called 16 ridge. A little bit more hairy, there's a drop off on both sides. The head wall, a little bit more technical. You got to put your feet in specific places. That area, we move a little bit slower for sure. But for the
I
most
would
part,
imagine.
though, he can go. So.
So, Brian, there aren't too many mountains in Florida as far as my geography
Yeah.
recollection goes. So, what kind of experience have you had with mountaineering, mountain climbing?
Yeah, so I grew up. So I grew up in Tennessee, kind of right on in Knoxville, right on the Great Smoky Mountains. There's mountains there. It doesn't look anything like the Sierras, nothing like the Rocky Mountains. So I did a little bit of rock climbing when I was younger, but a ton of backpacking. But obviously nothing that really got me into high Himalayan peaks or anything like in the Rockies. And then obviously went to PT school in Florida. Yeah, there's not really. They have mountain biking there, which is hysterical. But but it's actually some really great mountain biking in Central Florida. If you didn't know that, it's really fun. But
I did
so
not know that.
my climbing and mountaineering kind of came about whenever I moved out to California. So I guess that was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I moved out and I was like, oh, I want to do, let's go climb Mount Whitney. So we ended up going to Whitney, and I failed horribly, absolutely horribly.
Oh, really?
So I had been in Bali for 2 weeks prior to that, and I had just been surfing and not really doing much of anything. And then I fly back to LAX. My buddy picks me up, and we go straight up to Mount Whitney, the tallest mountain in the lower 48. And I'd been sitting at sea level for a couple of weeks. I'd just flown in, and then I just remember that trip. I was like, wow, maybe this isn't for me. I got altitude sickness. I couldn't figure out how to put on my crampons, none of that. But I guess
And
that's
Whitney's like 14,500, somewhere around there, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
like 14.5 or so.
Okay, so then later, I'm imagining, I may be wrong, but you do the biathlon to Whitney from Death Valley. Have you done
Mhm.
that, where you bike from Death Valley and then summit?
Yeah, and so
Of
now
course you did. Of course.
yeah, now I've climbed Whitney probably 6 or 7 times, I guess. But yeah, that time you're talking about, we did the kind of the famous Badwater Ultra the run, which is I'd like to try that at some point, but that's pretty insane. So
Oh,
it's about 135 miles running from Badwater Basin, lowest point in the lower 48, to to actually the Whitney portal. The official race ends, but I think some people will kind of keep going to try to hit the lower, or the highest point in the lower 48. And so yeah, we did that. But we biked it. We didn't run it. So we biked that, and then we went up and put our own little spin on it. So instead of doing the trail and running up the side, we rock climbed the front face of Whitney. So did the East Buttress, which is nothing really it's 5'9" moves are the hardest moves you do, but yeah, really 5'5", 5'7".
And you free climbed?
No. Oh yeah, yeah. We didn't.
You disappoint me.
Yeah, we didn't free solo. Yeah, no. But,
oh my gosh, that is okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess your resume is adding up right now, and the listening audience is going, "Wow, he's certifiable." Yeah. So,
yeah.
but man, wow, that is an experience. Okay, so obviously, you really trained hard and you trained well, and now it's 2023, and it's time to head to India, and instead of just flying to the Nepali border or into Kathmandu or wherever the case may be, you just had to put your own twist on that too.
So that actually was born from the Loda High. It's called the Loda High here in the States, from Badwater Basin to Mount Whitney. I did that with my friend Michael, who is the guy that we started Silent Summits, and then also is the one that I did the Sea to Summit. So from the Indian Ocean to the top of Mount Everest. So Michael had climbed Everest before, and you know, he was just saying, okay, so I'm going to climb Everest again. What can we do that's going to be a little bit different? And you know, I was just like, oh, why don't we just bike there from the ocean? You know, I was kind of throwing it out there, just just brainstorming some things. And a lot of you throw stuff like this out to, and they're just like, no, that's ridiculous. But then your friends are good friends when they're just like, yeah, let's do that. So I mean, the wheels just started spinning, and logistically, I mean, it was a big ordeal to kind of get everything set up to do it. But yeah, so ultimately, the idea was born we called it a Sea to Summit. So so biking from the Indian Ocean through eastern India to the base of Mount Everest, and then climbing to the tallest point in the world. So.
And how many miles are we talking from sea to like the Nepali border?
To the Nepali border I think the Nepali border was about 550 miles or so. The ride is not that long. When you look at like touring, you know, guys, you know, ride across the U.S., ride from North America to South America. I mean, ultimately the ride was 700 miles. It seems that like a long time, but it's really not that far. It was over the course of 12 days, and the ride through India was flat as can be. We were there during monsoon season, but it was flat as can be. I mean, we'd run into some rain and everything, but the part through India was kind of relaxing. It was just every day we'd ride, you know, 70 to 100 miles or so, and it's kind of that's what we did. You just wake up, you go ride, you stop for lunch, you keep riding. But
I imagine there weren't too many asphalt roadways. It's probably all just really tamped down dirt, or am I wrong?
the roads in India were so nice.
Really?
We couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe it. There was one section of about 40 miles that was just horrible roads that you would think of, just all dirt and you know, and wet. But yeah, for the most part, the roads were very nice, and we weren't in you know, very urban areas. We tried to pick the most rural areas we could ride through, honestly, to try to avoid traffic, because India is so populated, and traffic there. I remember we landed in Kolkata with our bikes. We put them together in the airport, and imagine that scene, you know, two white guys here, you know, and we're just like putting like these crazy bikes, and we had a whole mob of people all around watching what we were doing. But I remember riding out of the airport into the traffic, and I was like, what did I get myself into? Like, there's no order. It's just go do whatever you want, you know, cars going every which way, mopeds. It's just it's pretty crazy.
Well, then I imagine when you get out to the rural area and the mobs that met you at the airport aren't going to be much different than these villages. You must have been received pretty well, or like aliens from another planet. What was that like?
Aliens from another planet. That's 100%. Like I've never ever had the feeling what it would be like to be famous or a movie star or anything like that, and I definitely felt it there. I mean, it was really amazing. I mean, we did not see one other white person throughout all of India the entire time. after we left the airport, and we didn't see one other white person. It was really, cool to be the minority and just kind of see the flip of that. Most people, we didn't meet many people that spoke English at all. But I tell you what, though, I mean, there were three specific times I thought I was about to get mugged. We'd just be riding along, and a car would pull up to us and push me off the side of the road. Like, and two guys got off and they ran around to me, and they hold up their phone. They're like, selfie, selfie, selfie. This happened more than once. And we rode up to one where they built a barrier. They put their arms together across the road so we couldn't ride through because they wanted to get photos with us. It was such a surreal thing. Really,
Wow.
really interesting. And yeah, I guess, especially being in more rural areas, I mean, maybe they hadn't seen many white people before, or any at all.
Yeah. Now, Lonnie wasn't riding with you. It was just you and Mike, right?
No, we wanted to get Lonnie, but he has done tandem biking before, and he was just saying probably not the best idea because through India it was flat, but it's a different story when you get to the foothills of the Himalayas. That's it gets real at that point. But yeah, but I tell you what, the India ride though was really interesting. I'm talking about how we plotted it to be in rural areas, but there was one day. I haven't really brought this story up, and I ended up telling my mom much later, but definitely not while I was on the trip. But we were in this beautiful rural area through the middle of nowhere, like just probably my favorite riding day. Just nice and warm, and just just plains, and just it's actually a nice paved road out in the middle of nowhere. I was so surprised. And near the end of the day, this car pulls up behind us, and they actually speak English. And turns out they're missionaries, and they were like, "Hey, can we take you guys to dinner?" And I'm like, "Oh, sure, yeah, sounds good. It'll be a good cultural experience." They were from this town called Dumka in India, and so we go to the hotel. They pick us up. We go out to dinner, and you could tell that they wanted to tell us something. Something they felt like something was wrong. And I'll never forget this. The father was just like, the only reason that you're sitting with us right now is because God was with you today. And I was like, what are you talking about? So when you plan your route through India, you think about, like, okay, where are the nice roads? How do we stay away from cars? You don't really plan thinking about extremist groups. so
Oh,
so
yeah, that's low on the list for sure when I
so
travel.
I didn't even think about it, but these people we were having dinner with, they said you rode directly through like this hotspot of this. I guess they're called Maoists, Maoist, Naxalite group. It's like a communist party of India trying to overthrow the government there. And I guess we had ridden directly through their little village and like the area that they are in. And these people, like, I cannot believe that you weren't, one, killed, two, taken and held for ransom, something. I just can't believe it. And I was just like, oh my gosh, what in the world? So
Oh,
at that point, we still had another, another 100 another 100 miles to get out of India. And for me, it's interesting. Before that, I was waving at everybody, hey, how's it going? Super. But after that, man, I had my head down, just like not really talking to many people, just. But
oh
yeah,
my gosh.
so that was interesting. That definitely was a bit of a scare. And I know I told you, but we finally got to the Indian border where we were going to get out of the country, right?
Yeah, this is what I want to hear about too.
Where we finally get to leave. All I wanted to do was get out of India at that point, right? I just figured somebody was going to grab the two white guys in spandex and, hold us for ransom, and
Well, maybe they left you alone because of the spandex. You got to consider that. But anyway.
So we show up to the Indian border, and they don't speak any English whatsoever. We just hand them our passport, and they're like, no, we're just like, what do you mean? No, like, and then they won't hand us our passports back, and they just take us and they put us behind their stand there, and they're like, just stay here. About 2 hours later, the local military commander shows up. He speaks English, really nice guy, and he was just like, obviously grilling us everything. Show me your flights in, show me everything about your passports, and he asked like our whole history from the previous 3 months, what we've been doing. turns out we were riding through a militarized zone. And it turns out it was a militarized zone because they were at war against these Maoist people. So they were trying to get their land back from the Maoist people. So he did confirm. He was like, "Yeah, I can't believe you guys weren't nabbed." This was the military commander. He said, "quote unquote, I can't believe you guys weren't nabbed." So, but anyway,
So I think we should put a little email out to Google when it comes to like maps and navigation. They should probably include insurgencies or revolutions
right,
in their nav.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So then what happened?
So then he didn't let us cross. I guess this was only a border crossing for Nepali or Indian people. But he did. They took us back. He said, "Hey, you guys have to come to the military base with us." And we're just like, "What?" So they take us back to the military base. We spend about 10 hours there. And it's just the whole bureaucracy. This commander was talking to the higher up, who was talking to the higher up, just making sure that we were clear and good to go. Because they thought it was espionage. They thought maybe we were potential spies. I was like, we're just two guys out riding our bikes, like this guy. But they had to go through the whole bit and just make sure that we are who we say we are, and all we're trying to do is just ride our bikes to Mount Everest. And so ends up, they didn't let us cross there in the end. They were super nice to us at the military base. I mean, they gave us tea, food. I mean, they just had to go through their whole process, and ended up we had to get a shuttle about. It should have been an hour long drive, but it ended up being about 5 hours northwest to a different border. So that obviously added on quite a bit of riding time for us. We obviously extended the bike ride just a little bit, but so
Wow.
yeah. So that was it. Finally got out of India the next day and into Nepal, and it was the change as soon as you ride across the bridge. It is such a different world. As far as the Indian people were extremely nice to us, but they weren't shy. People would bombard us. I mean, it wasn't rare to have 30, 40, 50 people all come up to you if you stop. If you stop moving, they're going to start congregating around you. And then when you get into Nepal, it was very much respectful and just kind of they would ask maybe to come up, but for the most part, you were kind of free to eat your lunch or whatever it might be. Like, nobody would really approach you. But
Wow. Okay. So that in itself is a lifetime adventure, but it continues on, right? You
yeah.
connect with Lonnie, and then you start heading up to base camp 1. I mean, there's several base camps for those that aren't familiar with Everest. I mean, you've got to acclimate yourself and acclimatize yourself, get you to thinner and thinner regions, and this takes weeks. I mean, so yeah, give us the story from that point.
Yeah, so finally finished the ride. We met up with a group of about 17 people,
Wow.
which was really interesting. We had invited along, like my parents came and my girlfriend's dad came. We had a bunch of friends that wanted to do the trek to base camp because that's a trip of a lifetime. It's amazing if you're somewhat adventurous and have any desire to see the Khumbu region, see the Himalayas, I would 100% recommend going to just do the trip to Everest Base Camp. It's about a 9-day trek in. You walk, not too far, maybe 5 to 8 miles a day. It's definitely a bit of a challenge because of the altitude. You're starting out around 9,000 feet at Lukla, and then when you make it to base camp, you're at 17,000. So you're up there. But it's a really nice trip because you're staying in tea houses along the way, and you get good food and just a good cultural experience and just absolutely incredible views. But so that at that point, the trip had really changed. Before it was just Michael and I kind of in the wild, and then we get to Lukla, and from there forward, you have all these foreigners, all the trekkers, all the people going to climb Mount Everest, and it was just a completely different trip at that point. But yeah, that's when it all started. That's when we met Lonnie, and we took about 9 days to get to base camp, and just kind of slowly working our way up and staying in tea houses.
Okay. Yeah. So then you make it up to base camp, and now. Well, by the way, this is was this April, May? When was this?
This was April. So we met everybody April 6th, and I think all the trekkers were gone by April, I think 16th. Okay, so So April 16th, everybody's gone. And so at that point, the real climbing begins. You know, all the trekkers leave. We're there, and like you're sitting at base camp, which is right at the base of Mount Everest. You know, you see the Khumbu Icefall, which is right in front of you, and it gets real. You know, it gets scary. I mean, that this year, there was a Nepali climbing team that every year there's a Nepali climbing team is kind of hired out to set the fixed lines to the summit. And really sad, but I mean, the season opened up this year with 3 Sherpas getting killed in the icefall. You know, it just kind of sets the tone. Man, this is real. You know, like
Yeah.
that we're in a place that's constantly changing, and it's not an environment where humans should really be, and not really for that long. But so yeah, that was around mid-April, and we had to do 2 rotations. So we climbed a mountain called Lobuche, which is 20,000 feet. And then we also did a climatization to Camp 3. So we touched Camp 3 without oxygen at 23,000 feet, and then came back to Everest Base Camp. So we were acclimated and ready to summit April 29th, or the last day in April. So we're
And
ready
the cool
to go.
thing is, like, for the listening audience right now, I was able to follow along with your adventures because you did such a great job with social media and keeping everybody informed right from the time you. I have a vivid memory of photos of you in the airport putting your bikes together, and then your travails, your traverse all the way across India, and now up there, base camp. It was such a joy, and I gotta say, Brian, if you ever want to change careers, you could be the Ansel Adams of the Himalayas. Your
He,
photography was
yeah.
is amazing. So yeah, follow Brian on social media. I'll put the links again in the descriptions along with the fundraising event that he's going through, the drive that's happening, because those photos are just sensational. So, what was it like to be at base 3 and without oxygen and just I imagine you're not moving a lot. You're trying to just kind of lay low. What was sleeping
Mhm.
like? What was there a lot of headaches? What was it like?
Yeah, I fortunately I didn't really get a headache the whole time. I had it was definitely a challenge to touch Camp 3 without oxygen, but I was for that day for whatever reason I was feeling pretty good.
Nice.
And what we had done for that rotation was we went to Camp 2 and then just woke up and just went up. You're on the Lhotse face at that point. It's like I don't know, 5,000 foot, just sheet of ice essentially. And Camp 3 is just situated right kind of in the middle of that face, but we made it up there, touched 23,000 feet, and I was feeling good. Lonnie was not feeling good, and that was kind of like oh man, let's see how this goes. But yeah, if I put out a lot of videos for Sightless summits and everything, but if you can kind of see, Lonnie's the kind of guy. Once you get to know him, he's not stopping. Like he is going to keep going. If you didn't know him, you'd be like, okay, this guy's done for. There's no way he's going to make it to the Everest summit, you know. But his drive to finish something, not for himself, and it's not pride, but his drive to finish things because he knows that the impact that it has on other people with disabilities is absolutely unreal. I mean, this is a country boy from Indiana. You talk about training in Florida, wherever else. He lives in Indiana. He's got like a maybe 100-foot hill outside. He'll just walk up and down it over and over. You know, but he's a country boy. He's not your stereotypical athlete. You know, but he has that drive, that mental drive just to keep going.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah, there aren't too many people like that.
yeah,
But when you run into them, it's just amazing to just kind of almost kind of want to find out
yeah,
what what's that all about? So okay, so
but
you go from base 3, you're back down to base 1.
yeah.
You're feeling like you've got everything ready, and now it's just a waiting game for weather, isn't it?
So that was the issue this year. It was wild. I talked about monsoon seasons in India, and the monsoons in India are the reason that people are able to climb Everest in the month of May. So these monsoons come in through the Indian Ocean, and they bring in these high winds, big storms that push the jet stream up higher, which lifts it off of Everest. So it's the
Ah,
monsoons that you want to open up the climbing window for Everest. Yeah, but the issue was this year weather was horrible. So we were ready to acclimate, or we were ready to summit by end of April, we didn't actually get to the route was not fixed. Nobody can climb to the summit until the route's fixed by that team that I was telling you about. The route wasn't fixed until I think May 14th of this year. So that left us. We were ready to go, and we're just hung out at base camp for 15 days. 15
How
days.
many other groups were there? How many other people were waiting?
Oh, I think in our team there was only 6 people, but I mean, Everest Base Camp, it's like a
Small town.
it's like a small town. It's a big production at this point. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people. So it opened May 14th, and we had gotten wind that more than half of the people that had permits to climb this year were going to go. So we were like, you know what? Let's wait it out, and let's hope there's another weather window. So all these people went for the initial summit push. They left, May 14th. Some people summited on the 14th, but left on the first weather window, May 14th. And we ended up getting another one about 3 days later. And it worked out really well because there's actually May 14th, the summit opened. May 29th, it closes. The icefall doctors stopped maintaining the icefall at that point. So that's 15 days that you have. And so
That's it?
That's it. Yeah. So we let we let the people go for the first weather window. It's kind of risky because there may not be another weather window, and you don't get a refund. So it's that was part of it. We'd raised like $250,000 for this, and it's just because the weather doesn't work out doesn't mean you get your money back. So we were fortunate that there was another good weather window that opened up a few days later, but yeah, so then you had kind of asked, what's it like as far as sleeping and eating and everything. But, we left for our summit push on the 16th, and, base camp is very comfortable. I mean, you got every individual has their own big box tent with a little foyer in it. There's, like padded floors. I mean, it's very nice. There's espresso machines at camp. I mean, it's crazy. You leave there, you get up to Camp 1. It's very rustic, just tent and snow on a glacier. And then Camp 2 is actually pretty nice. We spent an extra night there. They had a cook tent there, that all the Sherpas had, they'd make us up some really good hot food. But above Camp 2, that's when things change. You get to Camp 3, which is situated right on the Lhotse face. And I'm talking like it is right on the side of the Lhotse face. I mean, when you step out of your tent, watch your feet, because if you trip whatsoever, you're straight down the side of the Lhotse face. Yeah, I mean, it's and then Camp 3, head up to Camp 4. You get to the South Col, and you sleep there. You essentially you get to the Camp 4, and you just lay there with your eyes open. The wind's ripping. It's just you're at 26. You're in the death zone now. Your heart's racing, anticipating your summit push the next few hours. So you just lay there and rest for about 5 hours. And Camp 3 to Camp 4 is no joke. I mean, it's a hard day. And we ended up getting up to Camp 4 around, I think, pretty late, around 6 p.m. or so. And then we left for our summit push for Everest 1 a.m. So we just laid in our tents. You just lay there. You don't get to really rest. They feed you some lentils and some rice, and next thing you know, you're up and at it again. I mean, I will say, anybody can climb Everest. It's you don't have to have technical skills. You just literally put an ascender on a fixed line and just work your way up. But I will say you've got to be able to push yourself, because it physically it's extremely demanding. I mean, there's just no stop. There's not much rest.
And then with lack of sleep, there's often hallucinations that occur, right? So what was that? Did you encounter that?
I did. No, I didn't. I didn't. Yeah, I didn't have any issues with that. I take diphenhydramine every day. Probably not good for me, but I'll take like ZQuil, basically just Benadryl. I take it just every night, just to try to knock me out so I can get some rest. But yeah, we woke up for summit push. 1 a.m. we start walking out of camp, and I tell you what, you're 5 minutes walk out of camp, and dead body is just laying right on the side of the trail. That's a good way to get yourself started for that day.
Oh my gosh.
It's like I said, it's very real. I mean, people push themselves to the absolute end, and I think that they push themselves so hard and they think when they stop they're going to be able to recover, but 28,000 feet, 29,000 feet, your body just can't recover. And you see these people out there, they've paid all this money, they've worked so hard to get to this point, and they just they'll push themselves to the ultimate red line and can't go any further, but then their bodies just don't recover, and
So
people just
am
die
I
in the
right
course.
in understanding you weren't using oxygen to summit?
Oh no, I use oxygen. I use
Oh,
oxygen.
okay.
Yeah. I use oxygen. And maybe if I was going back, maybe I would try without oxygen. But I don't know. Maybe I don't really care to say, oh, I did it without oxygen. For this year, especially though, like with Lonnie, it's like the ultimate goal was like, let's get Lonnie to the top, and I'm going to do whatever I need to do to help assist in that. So without not using oxygen, probably would have, it could have knocked me out, and then I can't even help Lonnie out. So. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you began your summit at 1 a.m. What time did you actually reach it?
Uh, so I talked about how we move pretty fast generally. This was a slow day. This was really
It
slow.
was.
Most people get to summit around sunrise, and you'll see this like really cool shadow of Mount Everest in the valley. We summited around 4:30 p.m. It was
Oh,
actually rather scary. We're going up, and people are like, "Are you guys still going up, or why are you not turning around and going down?" And we're like, this is what we got. So pretty much every day, you wake up and it's a nice, beautiful morning, clear, light winds. By the afternoons, the storms come in. And so that's where, that's why people try to leave early in the morning, get up there, summit, and get back down. So, we just had to slowly make our way and go as fast as we could, but in a safe way. And yeah, it was about just after 4 p.m. that we actually summited. And I remember that, that's the first time I got a little bit scared. I was like, this is kind of like a horror movie, like you've seen all these bad things that happen on Everest. I was it was just pouring snow. The wind was ripping. We couldn't see anything from the summit, which was kind of fitting that we were with a
the
blind,
sightless, yeah.
which was kind of cool in some ways, because it's like, hey, it's not about what we can see here, it's about the significance of getting this man here, and like what that means to other people. So that was kind of cool. But yeah, it was scary, because like, man, we have a long ways to go. And I remember heading back down, got to the south summit, and at about that point, it was getting dark, and we're just like, man, we had the whole called the triangular phase. We still had to descend 3,000 feet of fixed lines to get down. And man, that was a little bit eerie. I had seen a guy on the south summit as we were going up, sitting there just really tired. By the time we had made it back and going down, the Sherpas were just lowering his body back down the side of the mountain. I mean, it was like all these things were coming together. I'd mentioned I had my toe amputated, my right foot at that time. By the time we got South Summit back down to something called the balcony at 27,000 feet, my right foot was just throbbing. It was hurting so bad. It was pitch black outside. It was getting colder. The wind was ripping, and man, I was just like, oh, I hope to God I could make it back to the South Pole and be okay.
Oh
So
my gosh.
it was pretty wild, pretty scary, but
Obviously, you did. You made it back. Yeah, there's a little
yeah,
surgery on that toe of yours, but
yeah.
I took a glimpse of it last week or the week before, and it looks like it's doing
It's
pretty well. Maybe it's not fully
it's
healed, but
it's
you
doing
still
well.
have it.
It's I still have it. Yeah, I still have it. And it literally, I mean, it was not even. It's basically just the end of my toe was chopped. It just turned into dry gangrene, and it just obviously wasn't coming back. So yeah, I had it taken off, but it doesn't really affect my function much. I mean, I've been jogging, I've been playing golf, I've been weightlifting, all this kind of fun stuff. But maybe that's why it hasn't quite healed yet. I don't know.
Oh, well,
uh,
what's wild is this entire episode, we really haven't talked about conditioning or rehab or
right.
anything else. But
Yeah.
for obvious reasons, this is just an amazing story. I'm just thrilled to call you a friend and have you share this here. So, okay, 7 continents, South Pole maybe out for right now because deadlines really looming in the next few days. So let's just
Yeah.
put that off to next year or whatever. How many other summits, how many other continents do you need to check off your list? And is
So,
Lonnie going to be accompanying you, or you have other
so,
people that might join you?
so it'll just be Lonnie and Michael and I. And so Lonnie, before I'd met him, had already done Aconcagua and also Kilimanjaro. So he's knocked
Hmm.
out 4 of them. He's got to do Mount Elbrus in Russia. It's closed right now, but there's rumors that next year you can go to Russia and climb Elbrus. It's a quick mountain. You do it in 2 or 3 days. You actually on the north side of Elbrus, you can take a snowcat up and just walk the rest. It's nothing really technical. Actually, that's
What's the
the
highest?
side. The
And
north
what's the
side is
highest in Australia?
so Australia is a pretty small mountain, and so it depends on who you talk to as far as the 7 summits go. But most people would recognize Karsten's Pyramid as the seventh. So it's not actually in Australia; it's a part of Papua New Guinea.
Oh, okay.
So it depends on who you talk to. Some people say, "Oh, you got to go do the one in Australia," but it's like a hike, you know. So the one in Papua New Guinea, I want to say I don't know. It's maybe 16,000 feet. It's not that high, and it's more of a rock climb than anything.
Do you have any of these on your calendar?
Yeah, so we just now we're kind of figuring out that hey, we're probably not going to be able to do Antarctica. So I actually need to have a phone call with Lonnie and kind of talk that out. But it turns out next summer they are going to do a trip to the North Pole. So that might be
Ah,
something. We might do the North Pole. Karsten's Pyramid has been closed for a long time due to tribal issues in Papua New Guinea. So that's been closed for like 2 years now. So there's not really much left that we can actually do. We did completely shift gears. We've just been throwing around the idea of getting Lonnie to climb. It's called the regular route on Half Dome. So it's the kind of the northwest face of
hmm.
Half Dome, about 23 pitches, and no blind person has done it, and he's really wanting to do it. So there's some talk that maybe we'll try to get that knocked out here soon.
Wow. And that gets up to like a 510 or what?
Yeah, it depends on my route. I think, I wouldn't lead it. I might even have to aid climb some of it, but I think 510 A moves, so
Yeah.
nothing too bad. But
Ooh,
yeah,
still pretty technical. But
yeah.
then again, you don't have to if you are visually impaired, that feeling of looking down necessarily and
Yeah,
it isn't going to
right,
be there. But with the
yeah.
North Pole though, I'm curious, like, are you starting to sketch out like where would you enter it from Canada? Would you enter it from a different area?
I actually don't know that much about the North Pole. That's probably the one that I've looked at the least.
Uh-huh.
But we're in good hands. We work with a guy named Ryan Waters. He owns a company called Mountain Professionals, and Ryan is one of it's less than 10 people in the world that's ever done the Explorers Grand Slam, but he's done it completely unsupported. So he was the last person that did the North Pole completely unsupported. Some crazy distance, and he was pulling. It was him and a friend, Eric Larson, and I think they were pulling like 150-pound sleds just to make it through. There's actually a really good Animal Planet did something. It's called Melting: The Last Race to the Pole. It's a 2-part series, and it's done really well on Ryan and his buddy Eric. But so he's the one that's kind of setting all this stuff up for us anyway. So he's got us covered on that. But so I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
sounds like you're surrounded by a really solid team. So,
Yeah.
for a listening audience that wants to get more in-depth information or just see those amazing photos of your journey to Everest, like what's social media? Where can they go? And then also, if you've got yourself some type of fundraising website where people can contribute to the South
Yeah.
Pole, how do they do it?
So for one, all donations are tax deductible as we work with the Blinded Veterans Association. 5% of all donations go to the BVA to help with outings for blinded veterans to go do things that Lonnie does, get out to kayak or get out to rock climb. They go turkey hunting. It's all these things that you're like, wow, I can't believe a blind person does that, but they do it, and it's amazing to see. Yeah, everything's tax deductible. donations could be made through our website. It's www.sightlesssummits.com. And that just gives a lot more information on what we're all about. There's a lot of videos. I've made a few videos, especially from Everest, that are on there. So if you want to watch, from our base camp to summit push and all that, that's available there. But tells just a little bit more about Sightless Summits. And ultimately, our mission is to help inspire others with disabilities, just to continue pushing the boundaries of life. Like Lonnie, most people would say he this is a blind man. He can't be on top of Mount Everest. He was on top of Mount Everest, and it happened. So the body is so incredibly adaptable, and we're able to do so much more than we think we can if we just kind of push at it. So our goal is to help inspire other people to do that. So yeah, if you like what we're doing, then yeah, we'd really appreciate it, because everything is kind of self-funded. We're trying to just raise money for everything. But so Sightless Summits on Instagram and Facebook. And then for like my photography, I don't have a website or anything. I'm just kind of an amateur. But yeah, you mentioned Ansel Adams. He's definitely somebody I looked up to. But yeah, you could find some of my photos on Instagram, and it's at bhill117. So got a lot of.
I'll put those in there. And then, this next year, if you're not summiting or heading somewhere completely outrageous during the months of April and May, because this year, while you were summiting, we were a little bit more tame, but we were doing the Ride a Wave program, which I don't know if have you ever come down and Ride a Wave before?
I don't know. I know. Right. I haven't. I've heard of it.
Well, we get the School for the Blind, burn foundations, children primarily with learning disabilities, neurological deficits, or whatever. We take them for a day at the beach, where we take them surfing, tandem surfing, and kayaking and boogie boarding. So, heck, if you and Lonnie find yourself sticking around Santa Cruz or whatever during the months of April and May next year, we'll be at Cowles. This was our 25th year of doing it. So it's kind of a nice thing to get back into it after COVID. But I mean, it's not climbing Everest, but dropping in on a nice little wave with somebody is sure fun.
I tell you, there's different for Everest for everybody. It's like, it doesn't have to look like just climbing a big mountain. So pretty epic stuff.
But Brian, I can't thank you enough. I mean, sharing this story, I've heard snippets, but to get the full-on lowdown of what transpired, man, you're one of my heroes, and I'm so glad to know you, and I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing with Lonnie and Mike and the rest of the gang, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Yeah, thanks, Rocky. Really appreciate having me on.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. I want to thank Brian Hill and Sightless Summits for coming on and sharing what an amazing journey that he just got through, and the excitement for what's to come. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. You can always catch us online, zealouspodcast.com, or anywhere you get your podcasts. We'll see you next week.